Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on a Friday. We are presented by Rally House. Dave Revson, Jerry DiNardo, Dave Wanstead. Fired up for the football weekend. I got a little bit of a weird look from my spouse last night as I was watching Arizona State and Texas State. She found that to be strange behavior, but I'm ready. I'm ready for the football weekend.
And my spouse went to Madison to watch the Alabama-Wisconsin game.
Oh, she's
there.
She's there?
Yes, she is.
All right.
A fan?
She going to have the cheese on her head the
I'm
whole thing?
not sure if she's going to wear the cheese head or not.
All right.
I know she's going to eat some cheese and some brats, but
It's. I'm anxious to keep track of USC here, guys. I'm telling you, they were a team that last week we said weren't in the big conversation a month ago. Ohio State and USC, in my mind, I've watched all the games. They're the two teams that jump at you.
and SC doesn't play tomorrow, but they play Michigan next week.
Oh,
That's
boy.
nice.
Big, and
If you believe in off weeks, it sets up
up
nice.
in Ann Arbor, right? Up in Michigan. Yeah.
Ann Arbor.
We're going to talk a little bit about bye weeks and how they might impact you. Oh, we got a lot to cover.
What blocks that?
Yeah. It's the bye week block. Let's get into our big story. Tomorrow's action as we look at the big board. 13 Big Ten games. 5 of them are here on the Big Ten Network. Michigan, Michigan State, and Nebraska among the teams on our air. Conference game between Indiana and UCLA. Washington and Oregon both involved in heated in-state rivalry games. Purdue hosts Notre Dame, and then there is the much-anticipated matchup at Camp Randall that Terry DiNardo will be witnessing in person. Number 4 Alabama coming to town to take on the Badgers. First game, Wisconsin is hosted against an SEC team since LSU came to town in 1971. Alabama considered the heavy favorite in this game, as we know, guys. Coach Wanstead, what do you think Wisconsin would have to do to have a shot to win it?
Well, if you just think back to what happened last year when Michigan played Alabama in the playoffs. Michigan had 6 sacks, 10 tackles for losses, a sack. I mean, they made plays on defense that stopped or put Alabama behind the chains. And that, to me, is their defense is going to have to show up big time, particularly with the quarterback, Jalen Miller. I mean, he's an outstanding athlete. He can make the throws. He can make the runs. So we know all that. But if I was Luke, I would be telling my guys, this is a game where we can't have penalties. We can't have turnovers. We've got to play as clean. We got to win the field position. We got to play as clean a game as we can and not give these guys anything as far as an easy score, easy field position.
You know, there's an emotional part of games like this always for the underdog. And all of us that have ever been part of winning a game we weren't supposed to win, whether it be as a player or a coach. So I think it starts there. I mean, we're going to talk about the advantage Alabama has today by virtue of the question, what can Wisconsin do to win the game? It's not a question you ask every week specifically because we're talking about a team that's an underdog. So I think it's a great challenge for young people to go into a game as an underdog. I think it's one of the great parts of being a competitive collegiate athlete. It does have to start on defense. The defense is the strong suit of their program, has been since Fick has gotten there. The offense is trying to catch up. They've got to be able to prevent the big play. That's what they're going to try to do most likely. On the other side of the ball, to me, the offensive line has the biggest challenge. If they can protect the 4-man rush. Now, in this style of offense of Wisconsin, the ball isn't held by the quarterback a long time rather. So you want your offensive line to be able to protect the 4-man rush quick enough for Van Dyke to get, long enough for Van Dyke to get the ball off. If it becomes a pass rush drill, meaning that Alabama doesn't have to defend the run, then that's going to be a problem for this offense.
You know, one point playing off of that, I think the Wisconsin fans, and we were talking about it in the green room earlier, that they are a balanced team. When you look at what they've done this year everybody's got that perception that Phil Longo, it's, Steve Spurrier, they want to throw it 60 times a game. I mean, they came out and they had 400 yards. They ran it for a couple hundred. They threw it for a couple hundred. So, that's what they're going to have to do in this game, but that's what they're trying to do. I mean, they are truly trying to be balanced, and I don't know if the perception is truly understood that way.
And as a defense, and you know this better than I do, because you've been on the defensive side of the ball more than I have, and I've been on the offensive side perhaps more than you, is when you start a defensive game plan, even if the team throws it more, you still have to be aligned to stop the run first. Because if you let a passing team run the ball, then they've got you both ways. So Alabama is going to definitely stop the run, try to stop the run like every good defense does, and then deal with the pass.
Well, it's early in the season, but Wisconsin's been in 2 competitive games, probably more competitive than they would have liked and that their fans would have liked. And so I do think you can start to reach some conclusions when the games are competitive versus when they're a blowout. And one thing that has been interesting to me is, kind of to your guys' point, they've been more run than pass this year. And last year, as we know, they threw the ball more than they ran. It was the first time since they started keeping records on these things in the 1940s. This feels like more old school Wisconsin. They've run 47 more plays than their opponents have so far this year. So do you guys sense that there is a change philosophically, even though there's still same offensive coordinator, still technically in this air raid attack, which, as you talk about, Jerry, is premised on getting the ball out really quickly. Do you sense that they're going to lean more on the run this year than on the pass?
Well, interesting enough, when we were at Wisconsin for Camp Show, Phil Longo said, as long as he's been calling plays, he's only passed the ball 15 more times than he's run it. And that goes over his career. I think last year was more of a function, they were behind a lot. So the answer to that question is, if the games continue to be close, yes, I see more runs than pass. But Phil Longo or anybody, if you're behind, the only way you can catch up in most games is to throw the ball. So I would lean more towards they really do want to be balanced. And Fix said when we were on campus, he wanted to be more creative in the run game. Not necessarily I want to run it more. He thought maybe they could have more schemes and be a little bit more creative. So to answer your question, if they're in close games, I think they'll be more balanced. If they're not, like everybody else, they're going to have to throw the catch.
And when you look at the defense, too, I would look at it and say, what do we have? In 2 games, 3, maybe 4 sacks, half a dozen tackles. We're not a dominant defense. At least we haven't been to this point. Like in the past, they get 6 sacks in 1 game. That hasn't happened, fellas. So if I'm Vic, I'm probably saying, whoa, we definitely can't. We got to be holding on to this football a little bit longer, get this possession time going in the right direction. And that'll be a key, I think, too.
And remember now, Fick took over for Paul Christ, and Paul was let go, which means that things weren't going all that well. And I think one of the criticisms of Paul Christ was recruiting. And recruiting takes a little bit more time. And I think as the roster gets built in Madison, I think the look of the team will obviously change.
Interesting. This is a huge challenge, as we know. You were talking a little bit about Jalen Milroe. I mean, one of the things with this team is how explosive they are. Alabama has scored in big chunks this year. Now, you look at that South Florida game, that was a game in the fourth quarter, and it was a game because Alabama kept South Florida in it. They turned the ball over and gave the Bulls advantageous field position. Then in the fourth quarter, Alabama finally started gashing them and stopped giving the ball away. But from a defensive point of view, when you know you're dealing with a team that's as athletic as Alabama is, and you talked about Milroe in particular, he's a guy who's accounted for 9 touchdowns already, could do it with his legs, could do it with his arm. How do you slow down this attack?
How do you slow it down? You keep the ball.
But let's say when they have the ball, what do you do here? What's the approach against a team that's that explosive?
It all starts with the quarterback. It truly does. And I would go into this game, if I was Luke, and I would say, I want you to throw the ball. Prove to me that up here on the road, with our crowd, everything it's going to be a frenzy.
Yeah.
Prove to me that you can make plays in the passing game. And I would make darn sure that I did everything I could to stop the run. And, I mentioned all those stats that Michigan won. I'm sure Luke went back and looked at that. And another stat that Michigan beat Alabama, possession time. So they did keep the ball away from Milroe, too. So that's a big part of it, I think.
I think when the quarterback's a run threat, you lean to be more of a zone coverage team, and usually a cover 2 team with 2 deep safeties. If you have to account for the quarterback in the run game, then you want both rolled up corners so they can take the pitch or they can force the ball back inside. So it'll be interesting what their strategy is. But again, I think overall you go more zone than man when you play someone like Notre.
To your guys' point, it's nice that Wisconsin was able to convince Alabama to come up north and play a game. It's a shame from their point of view that it's going to be a warm day. Right.
This is Barry. Blame that on Barry Alvarez. He probably
this is when non-conference games are played, right? But maybe an unseasonably cold and rainy day would have served Alabama well, or served Wisconsin well, I should say, against Alabama. What about Purdue? Huge opportunity. They're coming off a bye. They get a Notre Dame team that is coming off, frankly, a shocking loss at the hands of Northern Illinois. So you've got Notre Dame that's reeling. Maybe they're highly motivated, or maybe they're just questioning the foundation of everything they believe in. I mean, I think that's the interesting psychological position that Marcus Freeman finds himself in. You've got a Purdue team that played a very easy game, frankly, against Indiana State, and then they got a week off. So this is to your point of the bye weeks, Jerry, that we were talking about off the top. Whose position do you like more in this game?
Well, my question for Purdue would be this. Spring game was a non-tackle event by design. They did two-touch, or I can't remember how they phrased it. Then I didn't go to camp, and I remember you guys saying it was a scrimmage day, but their first team didn't scrimmage.
Barely
I remember
played.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Then they play Indiana State, and that wasn't a very competitive game.
Also a scrimmage.
Also could be a scrimmage. Notre Dame's coming off an incredible loss, so you have to believe they're going to be ready for this game. Now, this is a traditional rivalry. Whether that means anything to this Notre Dame team, I don't know. I think the loss last week to Northern Illinois probably means more. And so for Purdue, if Notre Dame plays physical, that would be my question for Purdue. Could they respond to a very physical team? Because spring game wasn't physical. First game wasn't physical. The scrimmage you were at wasn't physical. So
it was physical for the guys who played, but I think to your point,
they weren't the starters. So if Notre Dame comes in and plays a physical game, I'm not saying Purdue can't answer the call, but I think they're going to be, if Notre Dame's got their heads right and they're playing physical, Purdue's going to have to answer yes. We could not tackle in the spring game, not play our guys in the scrimmage, and play Indiana State and still be physical against a physical team.
Yeah, you love talking Hudson Card, don't you?
Oh.
2 years ago, I was Tommy DeVito. Remember that? Yeah. I was even giving him game balls every week. and you kept coming back
last year at camp. We loved him.
And Rever kept saying Hudson Card. I was saying Tommy DeVito. Yeah. Well, 96% completion rate. Yeah. You are off to a good start.
I'm a gifted scout.
you are off to.
Can we talk about some other quarterbacks? I'm sorry.
Rever, you are off to a start, and I got it
really good.
And I highlighted it. I needed to give you credit and acknowledge that.
Thank you.
But, I look at this from Purdue's standpoint. If Notre Dame would have just run over both of these opponents, beat Northern Illinois, the backups would have been in. And generally when you have these games, we've both been there, you've always got stuff in your back pocket that you don't have to use, don't want to use until you get into the higher ranked games, like this one, like a Purdue. So from Purdue's standpoint, the positive is they had the week off, okay. They watched Notre Dame struggle. Notre Dame, to the last play, had to fight to try to win this game. So anything they were doing in short yardage on offense or on defense on the goal line or what's their best field goal block or anything, Notre Dame was trying to do it to win the game. So from Purdue's standpoint, you can use that as an advantage, and you get yourself in that situation. They're going to be in it. They're probably going to be, it's going to be a tough one, obviously. And Notre Dame's the better team, in my opinion. At least they've seen it and maybe anticipate something that might happen,
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting. Like, to your point, what Notre Dame's best third and short is, right? What they think their best third and short is.
If they had it ready. There's also the other side of that coin where they thought that it was going to be a one-sided game against Northern Illinois. And instead of having 5 third and shorts, they had 2.
Right.
So we may not really know what Notre Dame's going to do in certain situations, but they may not have been prepared for it.
Challenge for Notre Dame as well is Riley Leonard is hurt. He hurt his non-throwing shoulder. So whether or not their quarterback is even good to go in this game, Marcus Freeman seemed to indicate that they thought he would be, but man, they're reeling. And you think about it from Notre Dame's point of view. If you're 1-2
Right, no
early
doubt.
on in this year in a season where everyone was just kind of fast forwarding you
Absolutely.
into the 12-team playoff, that's a tough spot to be in. But one thing I just want to say is Ryan Walters, we had him on Big Ten today, and you'll love this, Jerry. I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't.
But he has not, how dare you? As a setup.
I'll watch when I go.
He has not shied away from talking about how big this game is. And, I know this bothers you sometimes when some coaches say, every game's the same. He has said this is a huge game. I have it circled, and I asked him about why you do that. And he said, well, because that's the reality.
Yeah.
That's what it is. 'Cause huge game.
And,
We're treating it as such.
the coaching thing, they say, hey, the first year you got to win the games you're supposed to, and then the next step is get a signature win.
Well, this would be a signature win.
This would be a signature win.
Shillelagh Trophy on the line between those two. And speaking of rivalry games, back on Big Ten today, the Apple Cup and the Platypus Trophy, both on the line this weekend. Ducks and Beavers play for the latter in Corvallis. 128th meeting. The Minnesota-Wisconsin series, the only major college rivalry that's been played more times. Ducks have the all-time lead, but the home team has won the last 5. Washington, the commanding lead in the series with Wazoo. They have won 9 of the last 10. Let's start with the Ducks and the Beavers. Oregon's been a little bit underwhelming, guys. Oregon State is good. How concerned are you for Oregon heading into this game?
Well, I am concerned because, a little changing of the guard. Obviously, when Jonathan Smith left to go to Michigan State, he took a lot of players with him. But the new head coach, Trent Bray, was the defensive coordinator. And so everybody's saying that, hey, they are as tough as nails. I mean, the defense, they've got good players coming back for the most part. So they got a quarterback that's a second-year starter. So the system, he knows the system. So this is going to be a real interesting game. And I did a little bit of digging on this Oregon thing because everybody was talking about how the offensive line, Jerry's, giving up sacks or not running the ball. Well, I got 2 thoughts on it. Number one, they're starting a sophomore and 2 juniors. There's only 1 portal guy that they actually have involved playing. So this is a young offensive line for the most part at Oregon. And Bo Nix, who was the quarterback last year, guys, the guy had the quickest release of any quarterback coming out, making decisions, getting the ball out. And it's the same thing's holding true in the NFL this year. I mean, he's doing the same thing. So my point is this, and Jerry, having coached it, nothing can help an offensive line and protection better than a quarterback that makes quick decisions to get the ball out. I mean, line coaches love that. So even though Dylan Gabriel is a great quarterback, and he's off to a great start, 80-some%, maybe the system, he's still learning and things just aren't happening as fast. And when the quarterback doesn't make things happen as fast, it affects the offensive line, and right away, here we go, our offensive line ain't getting it done.
I think it's fair to say most of us think, and I think Oregon feels the same way, is that they're underachieving so far. They're certainly not off to a fast start. What better way to get yourself going than to play a rival at the rival school? They're not in crises, but losing to Oregon State could be in crises. And so we have to assume that this is going to be a very mentally prepared Oregon team, and it'll be their best effort so far this year. Dylan Gabriel is really, really good. But their offensive line, and again, I watched them at camp, very athletic. I believe they're going to be very good, but they have had trouble protecting Gabriel, and that's got to change in this game. They're not running the ball. Their offense really isn't what it could be and what it should be.
That's what really stands out to me. I mean, again, the sacks are huge, and it's such a staggering number to have given up more 2 games in than he gave up all of last year. But 107 and 109 rushing yards in their first 2 games. Those would have been their 2 worst rushing performances last year. They lost a great back. I mean, Bucky Irving was a great back. So, again, that's part of it for sure. But it makes it easier, clearly, for the quarterback if he can run the ball. And they just haven't been able to lean on that either. Again, it's all tied in with the same issue that you guys are talking about with those guys up front.
And as great a coach, and Dan Lenning does a great job, tough guy, defense, all that stuff. But Mario Cristobal, when he was there, Mario's, he played offensive line for us when we were at Miami. he coached the offensive line with Saban and with, Shiano. So offensive line is his baby. And he used to take pride in recruiting those guys himself. And they've had some great first-round draft picks coming out in that offensive line in the past. So I don't know. Maybe it's a young offensive line, new quarterback in the system, getting the ball out. I think there's several variables that could be contributing to this.
I mean, I don't know the rivalry like I know some of the Big Ten rivalries for obvious reasons. But again, if you're still dealing with this underachieving after this game, especially effort and the mental things, then if you're Dan Lanning, you've got to sit back and say, I've got to get this thing fixed and change some type of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying benching players or whatever, but you have to look at everything you're doing. And so this is a big rival that I'm told. Obviously it is. But it's even more than that this particular year because of the start of Oregon.
And we talk a lot about the offensive issues for the Ducks. I mean, Boise State ran right through them. Ashton Gentie's great.
Yep.
I said earlier this week, I'll stand by it. He may end up winning the Doak Walker. But you're talking about a team here in Oregon State, guys, that's averaging about 300 yards per game on the ground. So the defense has some concerns as well for the Ducks. What about Washington and Washington State? They're both 2-0. They both look good getting there. In fact, the Cougs manhandled Texas Tech last week. So this is a really good team as well, but we know Washington has played very well here early on under Jedd Fisch. So how do you see this one, Wani?
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, a tougher game for Washington than what most people perceive, for the standpoint that the coach there, Jake Dickett, he's been building this program for 3 years. They're competitive every year. His quarterback, I want to get his name right, John Mateer. Okay, this guy he's leading him in rushing right now. He's a 7,000-yard passer over his career. So everything, I mean, this is a true dual-threat quarterback, and this guy is really a good player. So, they're going to make some plays on this Washington defense. There's no question about that. And the defensive head coach, tough guy. I mean, this is not going to be easy for Jedd Fisch, in my opinion. I think that, I think they're going to have to be balanced, but they're going to have to play smart. I think it's been a little bit easier for Washington to this point than what this game is going to be. This is one to watch.
When you look at most of the teams in the Big Ten, and probably most of the teams in the country, other than the ones that are in the top 10 in recruiting every year, most rosters are fairly similar, especially in the Big Ten. Now, I haven't seen Washington State, but I'm assuming Washington State probably has the same personnel as most of the Big Ten schools. So that's an assumption that I'm going to make. What I think is going to separate all the Big Ten teams this year is quarterback play and coaching in the matchup games. And with Will Rogers at Washington, when we were there for the bus tour, we didn't take a bus. When we were there for the bus tour, he was the difference maker. I mean, the offensive line was okay, the defensive line was okay. Everything looked like most of the Big Ten schools, except the ones that didn't have a quarterback like Will Rogers. The other thing is, Jedd Fisch, and I asked him at media days, I asked him when we were on campus, how are you calling plays and still being a head coach? Maybe you could do that at Arizona where the expectations wasn't the national championship. Now you're coaching at a place that played for the national championship a year ago. I think they'd like to do that again, and you're going to be a little busier as the head coach. And he just says, that's what I like to do, that's what I want to do. And I watched their first 2 games this year. He is a really good play caller. Now, if he can continue to call plays, you've got to defend a lot of different things. He'll run stuff that you haven't seen before. I mean, he's very, very creative. And so I could see why he does it. He's really good at it. So I came away with a lot of respect for him, his program. And when I watched the video, I came away with a lot of respect for the way he calls plays. It's pretty creative.
They've been really good.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I talked to him in the offseason, he made no bones about the fact, I don't really know how good we're going to be. Like, I'm not really sure.
They only had one starter on offense. I know.
He kind of said, we'll kind of see what it looks like here. But
and we can't lose sight how many players they had drafted and how many players left their squad, right, and went to Alabama, too. You know what I mean? So.
And how many came from Arizona to Washington?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the players that lost were the better players that they wanted to go to Alabama. Then would they have 8, 10, 12 players drafted? I mean, just it's not easy to replace those guys overnight.
And it's not a typical offense. I mean, it's more, if you want to call it West Coast or one, it's not the spread and it's not conservative. So it's a more difficult offense to prepare for because your defense hasn't seen anything like it schematic wise.
I was doing some research, and I'm saying, okay, who would he be mimicking as or as a mentor? And you start looking through his resume. It's Belichick, McVay, Pete Carroll, Mike Shanahan.
No, it's Spurrier.
I mean, this goes back. I mean, so you talk about having a playbook to pull some stuff from. Wow.
You got to go to the visor to see who everybody's mentor is. It's the offense and the visor.
He's a fascinating guy, and I think he's an offensive coach. I mean, that's his background, but. Man, Steve Belichick's done a really nice job at that defense.
Yes.
Oh, good point.
Really sound defensively. And I think sometimes you have this notion that a coach who's so focused on offense is going to ignore the defensive side or isn't going to be as focused on it. But, man, they're really good. Both sides of the ball. This will be a good test.
You think Bill's watching some tape at night? His dad? I guarantee he is.
That's a good, if you have to pick someone's mind a little bit, that's a good mind to be able to pick. Tomorrow, a Big Ten Network tripleheader kicks off with Michigan against Arkansas State. Then Michigan State plays host to Prairie View A&M. Minnesota takes on Nevada. And in primetime, it's Nebraska clashing with Northern Iowa, Northwestern, and Eastern Illinois. It all starts with Big Ten Tailgate tomorrow, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Go to btn.com/gamefinder for channel information in your area. Guys, let's focus in on the Huskers. Really intrigued by them. Two very good performances. So they're 2-0. They're ranked this week, which didn't used to be a big deal for Nebraska, but just to put a little perspective on it for you, the last time they were ranked, Dylan Raiola, their current quarterback, was in 8th grade. So it's a big deal now for Nebraska to be back in the rankings. Have they turned the corner in your estimation? Is Nebraska one of the top 25 teams in the country?
Well, I haven't seen all 25, but yes, they're the best they've been in a long time since we've seen them. And Dave and I were talking in the green room. Since Coach Osborne has left and Frank Solich has left, they've never hired a coach that took Temple and turned it around and took Baylor and turned it around. So I think it's
well, there are many people who have done that.
Right. Yeah. So I think it starts with that rule. I mean, we're talking about why we all think to go to a bowl, why they're ranked 25. They've only played 2 games, right? So I think it starts there. Marcus Satterfield, offensive coordinator, it goes there. Tony White, defensive coordinator. So you've got a head coach and 2 really good coordinators coaching this team. And as we all know, the support at Nebraska is it's endless. And so this is a team that, as they gain momentum, they're going to be more than bowl eligible. It's different than all the other coaches that we've seen since the Big Ten Network started.
And you know what's crazy? I mean, as Matt's building the foundation here, last year, 31 turnovers, right? Led the FBS?
Right. Yes.
Right.
And if you just took those turnovers away or cut them in half, they could have been a bowl team very easily last year. So they were probably a better team in some areas than what the perception was because of the turnovers. But, you mentioned Tony White and his defense. This is so different.
Right.
They call it now the 3-3-5. When everybody was running the ball more back in the day, it was a 3-5-3. Same thinking, same mentality. And it really causes confusion. It's a difficult scheme to get ready for. And even last year, with all the turnovers, this defense ended up in the top 20 in the country in defense at the end of the year. So the schemes, like you said, Jerry, he brought his coaches with him. He didn't have to coach the coaches. No, he's made a lot of great decisions, obviously, with staff and with personnel to put him in this position.
And again, the quarterbacks in this conference make the difference. Yep. Dylan Raiola is the real deal. And they're so smart. What Marcus Satterfield is doing with him, as you watch it, he's calling the game knowing that he's a talent, but that he's a young talent. Mm-hmm. And you could pick out the plays where it's just perfect for him. It's not too much for him, but it brings them closer to winning a game.
The big test is going to be when they get against an opponent and they get behind. Now we're going to have to throw the ball, and we're going to have to do some things to win this game. And you hope that by that time he has enough experience as a freshman that he can overcome that. That'll be as far as how far Nebraska goes. When you got a young quarterback and you're behind, it's a whole different ball game than when everything is in hand.
If the goal in the immediate term was simply let's end this streak of not making a bowl game, which you touched on a moment ago, Jerry, and just kind of maximize who we can be, it feels like what they're doing with Dylan Raiola right now is plenty for that. Really, it really came down to, I mean, to your point, Wani, like not only did they come one game away from making a bowl last year, but the last 4 games, all they had to do was win one of those. They lost all 4 of them by 1 score. So they were so close,
point.
and it really came down to, as you said, you have the most turnovers in the country, and you're getting awful quarterback play. So if you can just get good or adequate quarterback play and not hand the ball to the other team, and play as good defensively as you played last year, you'll be fine, and that's where they are.
And I think the fact that Raiola is there gives us a little bit of an indication. I know he has family history there, but gives us a little indication that they're going to recruit as we go forward.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And, Tom Osborne, who was not he didn't get the top 3 or 4 classes in the country every year, but he was a great recruiter. He was a tireless recruiter. And there's a lot to sell there. They've got the new facility. I'm not sure how much facilities mean anymore, as much as NIL does and all the other things. But there's just so many things that are pointing the arrow up. And I think Matt Rule and Dylan Raiola are 2 of them.
When you're basically the only school, big school in the state, and you're where the capital is, right there, you got a lot going for you.
Northern Iowa again tomorrow. Don't sleep on Northern Iowa, guys. 0-6 against ranked teams this century. 4 of those losses, though, by 6 points or fewer. They've given Iowa State some really good games when the Cyclones were ranked. So we'll see here against UNI tomorrow night in prime time. And Jerry, Wolverines fans figure to be a little disappointed given what happened last week against Texas. Let me put it to you this way, interested in both your guys' thoughts on this. Do you think that the loss for Michigan last week was more about the Wolverines and maybe the fact that they're not quite where they need to be, or the fact that Texas is just really, really good?
Well, Texas is really, really good, and this wasn't going to be a really, really good Michigan team, right? It's first year. New coaching staff. We lost a Heisman Trophy type of quarterback. So there are a lot of things. So tomorrow is going to be more of a test than Texas. I said to both of you guys, that Texas team is as talented as any team we've covered in the Big Ten in 18 years, especially up front. I mean, they are big and physical. But the offensive line for Michigan are all new. They're going to get better. It was a tough go to get better against that front against Texas. Then you have to decide on a quarterback. I mean, these are 2 major, major issues on the offensive side. Donovan Edwards carried the ball 19 times for 71 yards. Donovan Edwards is not Blake Corum. He's not a downhill guy. When Blake and Donovan were in the backfield together or in and out with each other, that was dynamic. Right now, they don't have a tailback game. And the last thing I'll say is on defense, I thought they would pressure Texas more. I'm glad they didn't. I think what they did was the right way to go. I think they had too big a package. There were too many missed assignments. So those are major, major issues that if you can't improve or fix those things against Arkansas State, then you really have a problem. Losing to Texas, who will compete for the national championship, losing to Texas with a new staff and a new quarterback and all that, that's not the end of the world, losing to Texas in the first game of the year. Yeah. Not looking good against Arkansas State, that's more of a concern, I think, than getting beat the way you did against Texas.
Yeah, I hear you on that. You know, Texas, 1 point on that. I mean, the quarterback, Quinn Ewers, I mean, he could win the Heisman. They're talking about him being a first-round draft pick. And the other point, talking to guys down in Texas, when someone goes to the pros or they don't leave, they're getting guys from Alabama and Georgia and Clemson to take their place. That's who was lining up. So very talented team, very good team. Could win it all. I agree with Jerry on that. You know, the one thing about when I look at Michigan's offense, you know, I kept hearing Colson Loveland. I says, God, this is sounding like Iowa. I'm serious now. And I look at the stats, he's got almost twice as many receptions as anybody else, receivers on it. I mean, they're going to somehow, And I know the issues at quarterback. They got to be a little frustrated right now. When your quarterback has more interceptions than touchdowns, guys, that's a problem in my mind. That's a problem in my mind. And your tight end is your leading by almost 2-1. That's a problem in my mind. Somehow they've got to get this offense in addition to the run game. I hear you, but passing game-wise is the biggest thing right now that I'm looking at, saying, how are we going to score enough points? You throw the ball to score points, you run the ball to win games. How are we going to throw the ball and make enough plays to score enough points to beat, good teams?
I think Orji is an alternative. I think he changes their offense, obviously, but look at Ohio State. I mean, they're running the option now because they're building their offense around their quarterback. I think you could do the same thing with Orji because I'm not sure that they're not better off with the threat of a quarterback run than what they're doing in the pass game right now. Now, Tuttle may be part of the issue as well. Right. I mean, it's hard to believe we're going into the second week of the season. We're at Michigan and we can't figure out the quarterback situation.
Right. Yeah, Jack Tuttle's been hurt for these first 2 games.
Right.
Sharon Moore saying, to your point, at his news conference this week that Jack Tuttle should be available. I know there were some people around that program who felt like maybe he would ultimately end up as the quarterback this year. It's just hard to say. They should be able to establish the run against Arkansas State. I mean, they've given up nearly 200 rushing yards per game against Central Arkansas and Tulsa. So this is a game where you should be able to run the ball. And maybe
we're having this conversation. Can you?
No, but then maybe that opens things up. But there was no wide receiver who jumped out at us when we were there necessarily, right? So, to your point, Wani, why is everyone talking about Colston Loveland? Well, maybe they're talking about Colston Loveland because he might be the first tight end taken in the draft. And
yes, but can you score enough points going that way?
But you can do it with Orji and Loveland. I mean,
right.
or you could build a tight end pass game around someone like Orji. Again, Donovan Edwards, is he going to be the running back that's going to carry the ball 25, 30 times? I don't know.
They need to figure it out because, as we talked about earlier, they got USC coming up next week, and USC's pretty good. So that's a conference game next week. We got a conference game this week, Indiana and UCLA. First Big Ten game ever for the Bruins. They're coming off that Hawaii win, and remember, they had the bye. Indiana has looked great through the first 2 games. Now, I get that it's Florida International and Western Illinois, but, man, they've been fabulous. What do you make of this game coming in?
Yeah, I mean, you watch them against FIU. I mean, they're a good team. They're a disciplined team. They're a tough team. I mean, they're hitting on all cylinders. Now, the second game is a little different, but the benefit of the second game is that they got to play their second group. And so
third group.
And so their first team has won a good game. Looked really good doing it. Their first team played well enough in the second game against a bad enough opponent where this doesn't happen in Bloomington a lot where you put your second team in during the regular season. And so they go out to UCLA, and I don't care who you beat, you're 2-0. And Coach Signetti, I mean, we all know he's full of confidence, right? Well, that confidence is transferring to his team. So, I mean, I don't know that there's been a better time since when Tom Allen had the really good team in 2020 that things have ever felt so good at Indiana. And that's the way I'd like to go to UCLA for the first cross-country game of the new Big Ten. I think Indiana's in great situation.
Yeah, and I know Kurt. His brother Frank worked for me at Pitt. He was my offensive coordinator. His dad recruited me to go to West Virginia. This is a lot like Jim Harbaugh as far as his upbringing. Guy's been around football with his dad his whole life. His dad's a Hall of Fame coach. He gets it. And when you look at their teams, I always like to see how a team starts. And if a team starts fast, that tells you that these guys came out of the locker room ready to play, regardless of who they're playing. They were well prepared. And his teams start fast. So he does. Kurt's done a fabulous job of getting them ready. And they're going to be balanced. The offensive coordinator was a receiver for me, but I'll tell you what, they will run the ball because the Saban background, his dad's background. So, they're old school football. And you mentioned a lot of guys playing second, third team. They played 10 freshmen last week. 10 freshmen got in the game, in addition to all the portal guys, James Madison guys that came with them and so forth. So the one thing that I want to see in this football game is the line. UCLA, give them a little bit of credit. I mean, they have got the portal guys going, and they recruit, and their front seven is going to be and their offensive line is going to be the strength of their team at UCLA. So to me, is Indiana there yet? I don't know, Jerry. From an offensive line and defensive line, this is going to be a little bit of a different deal for Indiana to what they've seen the last 2 weeks. They've got the big guys and the good athletes and good players. That'll be the thing I'll be watching right off the bat.
I'm not wild about UCLA's schedule. Playing Hawaii, week off. Garbers only has now one game under his belt under Eric Bieniemy. So they've got a lot more questions to answer. So I think you have one team that schedule isn't very good for getting ready for this game, and Indiana, the schedule couldn't be any better. Regardless of who they play, they go out to California with a lot of confidence. But again, you turn that video on in the first game Indiana played against a better team than the second team. They're a good team.
I was really surprised UCLA didn't run the ball better against Hawaii. They were
71 yards, I think,
under 80
right?
rushing
Yeah,
yards.
71.
Yeah. So, and you're looking at a team that led the Pac-12 in rushing each of the last 2 years. You've got Eric Bieniemy, Deshaun Foster. I mean, these are guys who are going to emphasize running the football and weren't able to do it. So that's got to be a little bit concerning for them. The one positive you'd say is the defense played well. And I think one of the interesting concepts kind of coming into this year when you try to wrap your mind around UCLA was they made this huge jump last year defensively, and Danton Lynn was given so much of the credit for it. He obviously goes crosstown to USC. Are they able to maintain it? And the indication in week one was, looks like they might be able to. So it'll be a good test here against Indiana, as you guys said, a lot of different weapons.
It was also the indication when we were there for camp. Defensively, I mean, they know what they're doing.
Front seven,
they're going to be a good defense.
Defense ahead of the offense. We'll see whether the offense can get going a little bit at home at the Rose Bowl against the Hoosiers. Back on Big Ten today, Illinois' defense really shined against Kansas Saturday night. Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week, Xavier Scott led the way. 2 picks, including the first pick 6 of his career, had a sack, forced a fumble. One of the leaders of a defense that tops the nation with 8 takeaways heading into tomorrow's game with Central Michigan. And Jerry, we wondered a little bit about this defense after last year. It seemed like they took a step back in year one with Aaron Henry as the defensive coordinator. Early indications are they figured it out. They took a big step back forward. This defense really won them the game against Kansas.
Yeah, and this is Brett Bielema's most balanced team. And one of the reasons Aaron Henry coming into his second year, they held Kansas to 17 points. Kansas is pretty explosive offensively. So Aaron's got his feet on the ground now. He's got it organized the way he does. I'm sure him and Brett went through everything on the defensive cut-ups during the offseason. And so their defense is really well coached and playing really well. Like I said, before we even get to the offense, this is Brett's most complete team, in my opinion.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the defense a couple years ago. Didn't they lead the nation in takeaways? And, they just found ways to do it. And, the encouraging thing is they've done it for 2 weeks, and this team is battle tested. By battle tested, I mean, over there 4 lead changes in that Kansas game, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And when a team is playing a good football team like Kansas, a ranked team, and you're going back and forth with it, and you find a way to overcome it, that carries a lot of weight. I mean, that's something that you can talk about and you can build off of as you go down the road further in the season. And the other thing, too, I would just say is, I got to give him credit. Luke Altmaier, I mean, last year, disappointment, turning the ball over, where now he's protecting the ball. And like you said, Jerry, they're balanced, and he's not giving the ball away, and they're taking it. That's a tough combination to beat.
I mean, a defensive coordinator, when you're defending their offense, they're running the double option. They're running the triple option. Altmaier now, when their defense is shifted and they have single coverage into the boundary, he's throwing that ball. I mean, they attack a defense in a lot of different ways that really is going to simplify whatever defense you're going to try to defend them with. So they're balanced offensively and defensively, and they're balanced within their offense.
To your point, Wani, 10 interceptions last year, yet to throw one this year. The thing that really stood out to me in that game was the 4-minute offense where they went 7
Yep.
minutes. They ate up, so it was more than the 4-minute offense. It was 15 plays. It turned into about a 10-minute offense, but kept the ball away from Kansas there down the stretch and won the game.